The Trump administration pulled out of NAFTA in favor of a new trade agreement. But what is the USMCA, and what will happen under the New Deal? Welcome back to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Anyone who's ever been in a long-term cohabitation situation knows there are some things in this world that are so complicated and drawn out that they often can't be understood, even with a room full of experts. These include leaving dirty clothes on the couch, leaving the empty toilet paper rolls on the dispenser, and insisting on inviting yourself along on a family Christmas trip. Carl? Another complicated and drawn-out subject is U.S. trade policy, specifically NAFTA. NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. The United States, Canada, and Mexico signed NAFTA in the early 1990s to make trade easier between the three countries. After all, we all have to live on the same continent, so we might as well set out some rules to make sure everyone washes the dishes when they're supposed to. Canada. But President Trump campaigned on replacing NAFTA because he claimed it's unfair to American workers and that Mexico and Canada weren't paying their fair share. Well, finally, on December 10th, after prolonged negotiations between the administration and Congressional Democrats, a deal was reached on a replacement for NAFTA. It's called the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. USMCA is harder to say than NAFTA, but according to Trump, it's a way better deal. But what is in the USMCA? And what are the political calculations involved in getting it across the finish line? And how many times do we have to tell Canada to wipe their feet when they come inside? Especially the moose. During the 2016 campaign, Trump was vocal about his opposition to NAFTA.
NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country.
Trump then surprised everyone in Washington by winning the election and then insisting on fulfilling his campaign promise. In September 2018, Trump met with the leaders of Mexico and Canada, and they agreed on the broad outlines of the USMCA.
The agreement will govern nearly $1.2 trillion in trade, which makes it the biggest trade deal in the United States history. Once approved by Congress, this new deal will be the most modern, up-to-date, and balanced trade agreement in the history of our country, with the most advanced protections for workers ever developed.
Now it's time for the approved by Congress part. This brings us to the present day, more than a year later. While cooperation between the Trump administration and Congressional Democrats normally looks like this time it might be more like this. The Trump administration hasn't yet released a final copy of the deal, but we do know many of the provisions that will probably be in the final version. Some of those took months of tense negotiations between the administration and Congressional Democrats. The first provision deals with whether Mexican workers can unionize. The Trump administration adamantly supported Mexican unions because it would increase wages for Mexican workers. And that will make U.S.-based companies think twice about moving to Mexico for cheaper labor. Next up is an issue that is near and dear to the heart of almost every American: dairy. In order to make sure Canada's dairy farms can still be profitable, Canada has imposed strict regulations on how much dairy the nation may produce, as well as how much foreign dairy may be imported into the country. So, Canadian dairy prices remain high while the U.S. and Mexico are undergoing a tragic shortage of poutine. Like pretty much every other topic in the world, there is a presidential tweet about Canadian dairy products. In 2018, President Trump said on Twitter, "Canada charges the U.S. a 270% tariff on dairy products. They didn't tell you that, did they? Not fair to our farmers." To be fair, he's right. Canada didn't mention it the last time I met with them. The USMCA says that while most of the Canadian system for managing dairy will remain intact, U.S. farmers will be allowed to sell across the northern border what are defined as Class 7 dairy products. These include ice cream and ultra-filtered milk, which is used to make cheese and yogurt. Although that does nothing to stop people from driving across the Canadian border to smuggle in cheese curds. Legalize poutine. Next on the list of major USMCA provisions is the issue of intellectual property, which is a fancy term for "don't take that idea, it's mine." I of all people know about this since I was the original inventor of Post-its. It's true. The updated regulations of the USMCA mainly discuss the issues of trademarks and patents around fields like biotechnology, internet domains, and financial services. That's important because a lot of the technologies in these fields didn't exist in 1994 when NAFTA went into effect, as anybody who used their Macintosh LC to access the World Wide Web via America Online can understand. Finally, there's the cars. Now I know what you're thinking, Chris, what does a 1980s new wave rock band have to do with international trade negotiations? While you might think that a good song is just what I needed, sadly no. We're talking about actual automobiles. The USMCA aims to have North America be the site of an increased number of car and truck parts. The current requirement to avoid tariffs is for 5/8 of a car's components to be made in North America. But the USMCA would increase that to 6/8. Ford Motors, 6/8 made in America. Another automotive regulation in the USMCA is that 30% of the work completed on cars must be done by workers who earn at least $16 per hour. Wait, Donald Trump supports a minimum wage? Why, yes, he does. It would represent a big boost for the average Mexican auto worker who makes less than $4 per hour. It's like the unions thing. If American car companies have to pay $16 an hour in Mexico, they might as well keep those jobs in America. See, it's still America first. And then there are the political considerations of USMCA. USMCA is actually something most Democrats are on board with. It's liberal enough that even CNN supports it. That being said, a lot of congressional Democrats were reluctant to give President Trump a win on anything, particularly in the run-up to a presidential election and impeachment. But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi threw cold water on the idea that Democrats would hold up the passage of the USMCA just for political considerations.
I believe the urgency of replacing NAFTA is very important. The opportunity that could be here now, we can't have as a missed opportunity. So it isn't really about politics, although there are those that I read about in one place and another who say, why would you give President Trump a victory? Well, why wouldn't we? This is the right thing to do for our trade situation, our workers, lifting them up, other multilateralism among the three countries that we would have. Why wouldn't we?
Well,
that is not a factor for me whatsoever.
Yes, political considerations are not a factor for Nancy Pelosi on this particular issue. That being said, Pelosi and Trump did finally agree on revisions to USMCA last week. Now it just needs to go through Congress in 2020. In other words, it's still got a long way to go. And while impeachment is a completely separate issue from trade, it will have a direct effect on if and when Congress will be able to pass the USMCA. Republican Senate Majority Leader and human melted candle, Mitch McConnell, has said that the Senate would only take up ratification of the trade agreement after the Senate concluded its impeachment proceedings. And while Republican senators have been vocal in their desire to conclude the impeachment hearings as quickly as possible and without calling witnesses, President Trump has reportedly expressed interest in turning the proceedings into a prolonged media spectacle, where he can call witnesses like Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff, and House Speaker Pelosi herself. This is gonna be terrible. I'm still gonna watch it. And finally, assuming the House and Senate finally pass USMCA in 2020, guess what? It still needs to be ratified by the legislatures of both Canada and Mexico in order for it to take effect. And that's far from certain. Especially because, remember this guy? He's not president of Mexico anymore. And I suppose if this goes past the end of 2020, someone else might not be around either. I mean, do you think President Vermin Supreme would sign it? What do you think of the USMCA? Leave your comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. So visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.